The air hung heavy, thick with a silence that felt like a presence. It pressed down on the lone figure lying in the bed, a child small and vulnerable beneath the weight of the unseen. Moonlight, fractured by the dusty window pane, painted strange shapes on the wall, their edges blurring into the deep shadows that huddled in the corners of the room. The room was holding its breath, waiting. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside, the sound amplified in the stillness. The child stirred, a small hand reaching out from beneath the covers, as if seeking comfort from the oppressive darkness. But the comfort was not to be found, for in the shadows something moved, something dark and hungry. It began subtly, a fleeting impression at the edge of perception. At first, it was easy to dismiss as a trick of the light or a figment of an overactive imagination. But as the days turned into nights, the presence became more insistent, more tangible. It was as if the shadows themselves were alive, whispering secrets that only the subconscious could hear. A whisper of movement in the dead of night, a cold touch brushing against skin already clammy with fear. The sensation was unmistakable, sending shivers down the spine and causing the heart to race. It was as if an unseen entity was reaching out, trying to make contact, to bridge the gap between the known and the unknown. The child, barely old enough to grasp the concept of nightmares, attributed these unsettling occurrences to the realm of dreams. To the child, the line between reality and imagination was blurred, and the nighttime visitations were just another part of the mysterious world of sleep. Yet there was an underlying sense of dread that couldn't be shaken off. But deep down, a primal instinct whispered a warning. Something was not right. The child's wide-eyed expression in the dark room spoke volumes. A silent cry for help that went unheard. The fear was palpable, a living, breathing entity that seemed to grow stronger with each passing night. The entity, for that's what it was, though the child couldn't have known it then, fed on fear. It thrived in the darkness, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The more the child feared, the stronger the entity became, a vicious cycle that seemed impossible to break. It was a parasite, a shadow given form by the darkest recesses of the human psyche. It was born from the deepest fears and anxieties, a manifestation of everything that goes bump in the night. The entity was relentless, always lurking, always waiting, feeding off the child's terror like a leech. It lapped up the child's terror with a chilling eagerness, growing stronger with every whimper, every jolt of adrenaline that surged through the small body. The child's fear was like a feast, and the entity was always hungry, always ready to consume more. The shadows under the bed seemed to deepen, to writhe with a life of their own. They moved and shifted, creating shapes that played tricks on the eyes, making it impossible to tell what was real and what was imagined. The child would lie awake, staring into the darkness, too afraid to move, too afraid to look away. The temperature in the room plummeted, a bone-chilling cold that sank into the marrow. It was as if the very air was being sucked out, leaving behind an icy void that seemed to freeze the soul. The cold was a constant reminder of the entity's presence, a physical manifestation of its malevolent intent. And always, there was the fear, sharp and acrid, a taste that lingered on the tongue. It was a fear that permeated every aspect of the child's life, a constant companion that never left. The fear was a living thing, a shadow that followed the child everywhere, a reminder that the entity was always there, always watching, always waiting. Years passed, and the entity grew. It was no longer just a whisper in the dark or a fleeting shadow in the corner of the eye. It became a constant presence, an ever-looming spectre that fed on the boy's deepest fears and anxieties. The boy, once carefree and full of life, began to change. His laughter became rare, his smiles forced. The entity thrived on his growing unease, finding sustenance in every moment of doubt and dread. It fed not only on the child's innate fears, but also on the anxieties and uncertainties that came with adolescence. The once simple fears of the dark or the unknown evolved into more complex anxieties. The boy's mind became a labyrinth of worries, each turn and twist providing a new feast for the entity. It was during these formative years that the entity's grip tightened, embedding itself deeper into the boy's psyche. Social awkwardness, academic pressure, the tumultuous awakening of emotions, all were grist for the entity's mill. The boy found himself increasingly isolated, unable to connect with his peers. Every interaction was a potential minefield, every glance a possible judgment. The entity whispered in his ear, amplifying his insecurities, making him question every word, every action. School, once a place of learning and growth, became a battleground where the boy fought a losing war against his own mind. It revelled in every insecurity, every moment of self-doubt, twisting them into grotesque parodies that haunted the boy's waking hours as well as his dreams. Nighttime offered no respite. The entity invaded his dreams, turning them into nightmarish landscapes where his worst fears came to life. Sleep, once a refuge, became another arena of torment. The boy would wake up in cold sweats, his heart racing, the entity's laughter echoing in his ears. The boy, now a young man, became withdrawn, isolated. His world shrank to the confines of his room where he felt a semblance of control. But even there, the entity's presence was felt. It lurked in the shadows, a constant reminder of his fears. The young man found solace in solitude, but it was a cold comfort, one that only served to deepen his isolation. He shied away from social interaction, his gaze constantly darting to the shadows, searching for the telltale signs of the entity's presence. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights sent his heart into a frenzy. He became hyper-vigilant, always on edge, always expecting the entity to strike. His paranoia grew, feeding the entity even more. His grades plummeted, his once bright personality snuffed out by the ever-present weight of his unseen tormentor. The young man who once had dreams and aspirations now struggled to get through each day. His academic performance suffered, and with it, his self-esteem. The entity's grip tightened, feeding on his despair and hopelessness. He tried to explain what he was experiencing, but his words were met with skepticism and concern. Friends and family, unable to see the entity, dismissed his fears as mere stress or overactive imagination. They offered well-meaning advice, but their words only deepened his sense of isolation. How could they understand the terror that stalked him, the entity that fed on his very soul? "It's just stress," they said. "You need to relax." But their reassurances fell on deaf ears. The young man knew that his torment was far beyond the ordinary stresses of life. The entity was real, its presence undeniable. It thrived on his fear, growing stronger with every passing day. Relaxation was a luxury he could no longer afford. But how could he relax when he knew that the moment he'd let his guard down, the moment he allowed himself to drift off to sleep, the entity would be there, waiting to feast on his terror? Sleep became a battleground, a nightly struggle against the encroaching darkness. The young man lay awake, eyes wide open, heart pounding, knowing that the entity was always there, lurking, waiting, feeding on his fear. Adulthood brought no respite. The fears that had once been confined to the shadows of his childhood had now become a relentless waking nightmare. Every corner he turned, every decision he made was haunted by the spectre of his past. The entity, now a constant presence in his life, had learned to anticipate his fears, to exploit his weaknesses with chilling precision. It was as if it had a mind of its own, a malevolent intelligence that thrived on his suffering. It lurked in the shadows of his relationships, whispering doubts and suspicions, poisoning his ability to connect with others. Friends became strangers, and loved ones turned into distant figures, all because of the insidious whispers that eroded his trust. It haunted his career, magnifying his insecurities and sabotaging his efforts. Every project he undertook, every goal he set, was undermined by the relentless voice that told him he wasn't good enough, that he would never succeed. It turned every aspect of his life into a living nightmare. The world around him seemed to darken, the colours fading into a perpetual twilight, as if the entity's presence was leeching the very life out of his surroundings. He became a recluse, shutting himself off from the world, seeking solace in the bottle and the needle. The substances offered a temporary escape, a fleeting numbness that dulled the edges of his fear, but they also dragged him deeper into the abyss. Anything to numb the pain, to dull the fear that gnawed at his sanity. The more he tried to escape, the tighter the entity's grip became, feeding off his despair and growing stronger with each passing day. But the entity was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for him to lower his guard. It thrived in the moments of weakness, in the seconds when he thought he might find peace, only to snatch it away and replace it with terror. Sleep, once a refuge, had become his greatest tormentor. The nights were long and filled with dread, each hour stretching into an eternity as he lay awake, fearing the moment he would drift off and the nightmares would begin. His dreams were vivid, terrifying hallucinations, populated by grotesque creatures and landscapes that shifted and morphed with his every fear. The boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving him trapped in a perpetual state of fear. He would wake up screaming, his body slick with sweat, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The terror of his dreams clung to him, refusing to release its grip, leaving him exhausted and broken as he faced another day in his living nightmare. He was trapped, caught in a downward spiral of fear and despair. The entity had become his jailer, and the prison was his own mind. He had long since given up hope of escape. All that remained was the chilling certainty that his torment would never end. His body, ravaged by years of substance abuse and psychological torture, was a mere husk. His once bright eyes were now dull and lifeless, windows into a soul crushed by fear. His skin hung loose on his bones, a testament to the entity's insatiable hunger. Even in the depths of his despair, a flicker of defiance remained. He would not give the entity the satisfaction of seeing him completely broken. He clung to the last shreds of his sanity, a lone candle in the encroaching darkness.